Hi, my name is Shawn, and this is my sign name, which means eagle. I'm profoundly deaf, and I live in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, and I've grown up here. How about you? Hi, Shawn. Thank you for introducing yourself. My name is Clare, and this is my sign name. I was born and raised in Papua New Guinea. I was born with hearing, and then at the age of 16, I lost my hearing, and I identify as a deaf person. Nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you also. In terms of my cultural background, we moved to Australia from Malaysia when I was 9 months old. Now, I'd like to ask you a question about your experiences as a deaf person. What assumptions did hearing people make about your English literacy skills? Well, I moved to Australia to study in Brisbane, and the university just assumed that I could speak and write with fluent English. And they assumed that of university students because English is the first language of Australia. But I think it's not right to assume that because I came from a different background of diverse languages, including Tok Pisin or Pidgin, and Papua New Guinean Sign Language, and there's a diversity there. So to assume that is not correct. Learning English was a real challenge. It was hard work. I had to learn to write and read and speak it. So for me, as a deaf person, I think they should have been more open-minded to learn about me and where I came from and my language background. What about you? Well, my experience growing up was different to yours. I grew up in a multi-language, multicultural family. English was my family's fourth language. So a lot of hearing people thought that I was dumb or intellectually impaired, that I couldn't speak or read or write English. And I found lip reading quite difficult because in fact only 30% of English is visible on the mouth, and particularly if someone has a heavy accent, perhaps they're from another country, they're very hard to read. For example, my parents speak English with a Malay-Chinese accent, so it's very hard to understand what they say in English by lip reading. I much prefer communicating in Auslan or simple English. Deaf people have experienced a variety of educational experiences, and not all have been taught English well. It's important to adapt to the needs of deaf people. We as deaf people are normal humans with emotions. We're not dumb. We're not to be viewed as animals or toys that hearing people can put down. We should be respected for our language and our culture. I learnt English at school, university, and TAFE, but my schooling experience was very poor. I didn't have any sign language or interpreting supports. University and TAFE helped me a lot to improve in my Auslan and my English literacy skills, which I'm glad about. Thank you, Shawn. I have another question for you. Where and how did you learn Auslan? That's a good question. My experience in education growing up was quite strange and quite disrupted. I experienced a lot of experimentation in my education, including oral methods, signed English, cued speech or cued articulation, Auslan, Pidgin signed English, which is a mix with sign language, and also the Rochester method. So these methods didn't suit me, and I had to persevere through that. I also learnt Auslan at school in year 12 when my school changed from using signed English to using Auslan. But it was really at university in TAFE where I learnt proper or real Auslan. At school, the hearing teachers or the interpreters didn't really use a high quality form of Auslan. So it wasn't until I was with the deaf community and seeing it. My parents, when I was small took me to the deaf club and deaf community events and deaf social events. And so I got to see that, and that was really supportive. But at school, I really only used signed English or used the oral methods, which was really hard. I'm really pleased I had mentors to look up to. A lot of deaf people taught me and helped me to be immersed in the community and the language. After school, I went to university in TAFE and was still involved in community events. I went to things like PD workshops where I learnt about the linguistics and structure of sign language, and I'm so pleased the deaf community shared their language with me. It hadn't been easy. I also appreciate deaf people accepting my parents being from Malaysia, having a different language, and sharing sign language with them. How about you? What was your experience learning sign language? Well, I grew up mostly using speech to communicate, but when I moved here in 2016 to study, that's when I started to learn Auslan. And I learned in a few different ways. I had tutoring through an international students program. So I was introduced to Auslan in that way. I was surprised just how beautiful Auslan was as a language. So with that tutoring, that really helped me develop my Auslan skills. It was a few hours on a weekend where I would get tutoring and I would practice and observe. Another way I learnt was through mixing socially with the deaf community here in Brisbane. And then also at the university, I had interpreters in my classes, so I learned Auslan from them. So that's how I developed my skills in Auslan. Very slowly growing, just like a flower slowly blooming. And then after a few years, I became very confident in sign language. That's interesting. Thank you, Claire, for sharing your experience. I had a similar experience. I learned Auslan in different ways at university, TAFE, through interpreters, and the deaf community. It was incredible. Being immersed in the deaf community, you get to learn such a rich language like Auslan. I wanted to ask you about your thoughts about your language skills in sign language, your written skills, and your speech, how they've grown in richness over time. Well, through the community, I would interact socially with deaf people. I'd observe people who had very strong Auslan backgrounds. Perhaps they came from multi-generational families of deaf people. I would learn from them. At university, I would meet friends and also interpreters and communicate with them in sign language. And it changed my view of my language, my use of English and Auslan together, and how I wrote or how I read or how I would speak. I think too, meeting people from other countries that now live here in Australia, meeting people from diverse languages and cultural backgrounds broadened my view. I would observe them and take opportunities to learn from them. So these were really rich experiences for me to improve my own skills. And I came to see the differences between Auslan and English and my own home language, Tok Pisin, and how I would communicate with other people and learn from other people. So, for example, if I met someone from a different language or culture, like yourself coming from Malaysia, I would observe how you use sign language and how you use English when you communicate with me, for example, by text. And so I learned from all these different people, and these are rich experiences to improve myself. How about you? Yes, I developed my language skills firstly in Auslan by being included in the deaf community. And I found it was best to be face to face, not learning from TV or YouTube or social media platforms like Facebook where there was technical issues. Sign language is a 3D language, and I guess maybe even a 4D language where there's also other senses like feeling and smell and touch and building rapport with people in person. Auslan is also a visual language, so you need to be with people and meet people. And if you don't practice your Auslan skills, there's a risk of forgetting it and losing it or reverting to older styles of signing. When I was young, my parents used a mixture of home sign, Australian Signed English, and Auslan. But now my parents are trying to learn proper Auslan and to communicate with proper Auslan grammar with me. My English literacy skills grew because of reading books and watching TV with captions. And if I didn't understand things, I would ask hearing friends or colleagues what particular words meant. And because English is such a rich language, there's so many different contexts to it as well. There's Australian slang, there's government language and jargon, there's academic English, there's school English, and there's basic English used in the community. So it was hard to understand what things meant. English was a very hard language to learn just because English has more rules. There's also more double meanings. There's also English or hearing humor, which is different to deaf humor that I'm used to. But I'm really pleased that people have helped me to understand that about English. Also, participating in deaf community events, I'm able to interact with deaf people from generations of deaf people, or even coders, and learn language and culture from them. Also, deaf people from different countries who've immigrated to Australia, bringing their language and culture. We can all connect easily. At the same time, I have an understanding of my family's culture and also white Australian culture, and also Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander or First Nations culture and ways of communicating and language. So Australia is such a rich and diverse country of languages and cultures and ethnicities. It's important that we are respectful and courteous when we communicate with each other and when using sign language. Yes, and in addition, I have noticed that the sign language used in Papua New Guinea has similarities to Auslan and BSL. So I think the sign language used in Papua New Guinea has been strongly influenced by Auslan. So in my time in Brisbane, strengthening my skills in Auslan and then going back home to visit Papua New Guinea, I have noticed and observed the differences and similarities in the two sign languages, and also adapting the way I sign to communicate. And when I observe Papua New Guinean sign language, I have to adapt to understand that. So in teaching now, I have a rich language to use in Auslan. At university, I had to use English to a fairly high level. And in meeting with deaf friends or in communicating with the deaf family that I stayed with around the dinner table or over a coffee, we would have these rich conversations in Auslan. I would then have to adjust back to using English at university. So it was constant adjustments, but it's enriching to know you can learn and use a variety of languages. For example, whether I'm in Papua New Guinea, here in Brisbane, or meeting a diversity of people like you who've come from Malaysia. Yes, it's interesting that here in the state of Queensland, the language we use has changed so much over time. It's been influenced by Auslan, Signed English, New Zealand Sign Language, British Sign Language, International Sign, Signed English, and some Irish Sign Language. So the language has changed a lot, just like the English language is always changing and evolving. Well, thank you for your time, Claire. Thank you, Shawn. It was lovely to learn about your experience and your views and your rich experience in language and culture and with people of different backgrounds. Thank you. Thank you.